Hello viewers, welcome to a new episode where we will be discussing about uses and gratification theory. Although it was developed in the early 1940s, it is still relevant today in the latest media. We have with us today Ms. Sushmita Pandit, who is a teacher in Future Media School Sonarpur, Kolkata. Welcome ma'am.
Hello Shantan.
I am Shantan Mukherjee, a student of Media Science at ILEAD College, Kolkata. Tell us ma'am, how is this theory still relevant in the latest media?
The theory is still relevant because now we have access to various new media resources like the internet, and because we have access to such resources, so this actually makes the theory gets its relevance because people now have the right to choose what particular kind of material they want to use. As you can see that this particular theory which had its early beginnings in the early 1940s, it came at a time when limited effects model gained relevance, because before that, as we know, that there were mainly models which used to say that the media actually creates influence on the people, but people are not active consumers, they are the passive ones. The media acts actively and it influences the people. But this particular theory, as we can see, that this particular theory actually goes beyond that, and it says that the media actually influences the people, but the people actually choose which particular media they want to use in order to gratify their needs. So basically we can see that the beginnings, as you rightly said, the beginnings of this theory can be traced in the early 1940s when the limited effects approach towards media was being developed. And we see that the work of people like Herta Herzog and Paul Lazarsfeld and Frank Stanton, they were actually trying to study how active gratification seeking audiences are being developed by the media. So this theory, basically we can't name a particular person as the propounder of this theory, but we can actually say that to some extent Herta Herzog is often credited as the originator of the uses and gratifications approach as a whole. Also, what we see is that Herta Herzog basically tried to study the fans of a popular quiz show in America and how they were being influenced by that particular quiz show. And when she was studying this particular phenomenon, she listed some of her findings. She said that it was a means of emotional release for the people listening to that particular quiz show. It helped them to be at a particular position emotionally, a strong position. That's why they actually listen to those quiz shows. Also, the second finding which she found was that a particular kind of enjoyment had concerned the opportunities of wishful thinking because of those quiz shows. And the third finding was that the commonly unsuspected form of gratification concerns the advice obtained from listening to daytime serials. So basically, to seek advice, whatever the quiz show or whatever the serials which the people are hearing over the radio, they actually give them particular kind of advice which they actually try to use in the real life. So we have to understand that this was something which was formulated by Herta Herzog in the early 1940s. So it might not be totally relevant today, but it has changed the kind of relevance it has today. Also, one more person, Wilbur Schramm, and his book called The Process and Effects of Mass Communication had actually offered an early active audience kind of an approach. He had actually conceptualized that kind of an approach initially. So when he particularly conceptualized it, he actually asked this question like what determines which offerings of mass communication will be selected by a given individual. And what he said at that particular moment of time is the expectation of reward in association with the effort required to get that reward. That means a person is watching a particular program or listening to a particular radio station because he expects a particular kind of reward.
What kind of reward?
But what kind of reward, in the sense, like what he said is that people weigh the level of reward they expect from a given medium or message against how much effort they must make to secure that reward. Now basically, suppose a particular kind of, maybe a very commercial kind of a film. So people are watching that particular film in order to gain entertainment. So So they expect the reward of entertainment. Okay, so the effort would be to just watch the film. Okay, so the effort is like they would not give themselves totally, like they would not actually, they don't want to watch a particular film which is going to give them a kind of stress which will make them think too much. Okay, that also they can do, but it also depends on the social situations they are in. Suppose they are not, they are sad, then they will actually want to just entertain themselves, and that's why they will choose a particular kind of music or a particular kind of serial or a particular kind of movie which is going to entertain themselves totally without making them think twice. Now, basically, we will move on to the uses and gratification approach. Now, as I said, after the magic bullet theory and all those theories which had put media in the topmost position of deciding what the people want to see or not, that is decided by the media. The media was the one and the prime thing of importance. We see that the limited effects model actually totally changed it, and in the effects model and effects research tradition, the uses and gratifications research also came in. So this research actually developed in the early 1970s mostly. Okay, in the 1940s we see that bits and pieces of research regarding gratifications approach was being done, but it was mainly in the 1970s that this research actually gained a revival. Okay, in that sense, and the research can be traced to three developments. First, new survey research methods and data analysis techniques were developed at this particular moment of time in the 1970s. So what we actually see is that in the United States, basically, because of the development of new survey-based research techniques and methods, different kinds of questionnaires were being prepared, new data analysis techniques were being done, the researchers, the people as a whole were actually developing various kinds of categories to conduct research, which will put the audience member into prime focus. So how actively the audiences are getting engaged with the media, that could be studied. So all this was happening basically in the 1970s.
Was this to keep up with the growing number of audiences in America?
Yes, because the audiences number was also increasing, because the number of media channels was also increasing in America. And this was a time when television as a whole, along with radio, had traveled to many parts of the world, I must say. Not only America. In America, it was at its peak, okay, because of the advent of the cable television and all those channels. So basically, people were actually watching media at a regular interval. So because of that, as you rightly pointed out, people, also researchers were mostly trying to find out how this television is creating an impact among the people. They were mostly concerned with television, not with radio as such, because initial researchers were with radio, but because television was a big thing, so all the researches which were happening at this point of time, they were concerning television mostly. So computer resources as a whole was being used to actually find out about the different kinds of methods which can be used to study the audiences particularly. So this is one of the reason. The second reason is basically because some media researchers developed increasing awareness that people's active use of media might be an important mediating factor. So what was happening is that they argued that a member of an active audience can actually decide whether certain media effects are desirable and set out to achieve those effects. So the audience actually can choose that whether this particular media effect is something which I want to use in my life or not. So audiences actually choose what kind of an effect the media will have on it. This is something which they found out in the early 1970s, and so people actually tried to research more about it. Okay. The third thing, because of which this approach developed in the early 1970s, is a growing concern that effects research was focusing too much on unintended negative effects of media. Basically, the researchers, they had a notion, the researchers who were working with the effects model, they had the notion that the limited effects research was totally actually trying to prove that the media is always having a negative effect, which might not be the case. Media is not always having a negative effect. We have to study it deeply to understand that the audience might actually choose which effect is negative, which effect is positive. It might be the audiences who can make a decision and choose whether the effect is being negative to him or her or not. Okay, so this is something which was not actually questioned before. So uses and gratifications approach is trying to question that particular aspect of the limited effects model. That it might be that the media might have some positive influence, and it might actually vary from one particular person to the other person. It's not that it will remain constant for all the people, but it might be that different people might have different approaches, and they might have different kinds of, they might use the media for satisfying different kinds of functions. So it might be positive or it might be negative. Main theoretical framework, if we see, as I have in the beginning of the lecture only I had pointed out that it was not only one particular person who was actually developing this particular theory. So there were a lot of people who actually tried to focus their attention to this particular kind of research. So we have to name Elihu Katz, J. Blumler, and Michael Gurvich, who in 1974 they described 5 important elements, the main crux of the uses and gratification model. First thing which they said is that the audience is active and its media use is goal oriented. So whenever an audience is using a particular kind of media, whether it's television or whether it's radio, whether it's newspapers, so he or she is using that media for a particular kind of reason. Okay, and so he has a particular kind of goal. Now you can link this to Wilberstram's thing which we discussed, like the effort required.
Yes.
Okay, so basically the thing is he or she is using it because he wants to satisfy one of his goal. It might be entertainment, it might be diversion. Maybe a particular person is not feeling fine. Okay, he is depressed. So he might use a particular media or maybe listen to a particular song in order to, escape from, or in order to divert his mind from all the stress which he is going through. Okay.
Getting a reward basically.
Yeah, getting a reward basically. That is the reward he wants, at least for a particular, for some brief moment of time. But because he has to return to his real life circumstances, of course.
Yes.
But maybe for some amount of time he is getting a bit of relaxation. So diversion, escapism, relaxation, entertainment, all these might be the goals which the people want from the media. The second thing which they said, they linked need gratification to a specific media choice, and they said that this need gratification actually is linked to the audience member. That is, the audience member actually decides which specific media it is going to use. As I said in the last example itself, that a particular person might choose whether he is going to use internet as a medium for gaining information, or whether he is going to use television as a primary source to gain information or not. That is something which is totally dependent
on the audience.
Okay, so it's not that the media can force somebody, but it is basically the audience who chooses which media he will be using to gain information or knowledge. Third point which they put forward is that the media competes with other sources of need gratification.
Okay, what kind of sources will they be?
Media actually is competing with the events in the environment. Events in the environment in the sense that, like, various kind of social activity. Suppose a particular person is not only listening to radio, not only watching television, but he is also a member of the society or maybe a social group. Maybe he has friends with whom he engages into a discussion regularly. So from that discussion also he might get access to a particular kind of information, or from that discussion he might gain access to a particular kind of knowledge, which maybe later on he can actually try to verify that knowledge using maybe the internet or maybe television. So many a times, people are not only influenced by the media, but the media acts as one of the resource among the other resources. But media is an important resource, but the other resources are also important. So various kinds of social activity with various kinds of things happening in the environment. So the media has to regularly compete with the other things feelings of need gratification. The next point which they put forward was that people are aware of their own media use to be able to provide researchers with an accurate picture. This was something which they formulated, that because people are aware which particular media they are using and for what purpose, so the researchers can actually directly talk to these people and gain access to whatever information they give, and it will be easier for these researchers to find out more about how audiences are using the media. Then comes the point that value judgments regarding the audiences linking its needs to specific media or content should be suspended. That is, the researchers should not actually think at the onset of conducting the uses and gratification research that this particular media has always had negative impact. Maybe the researcher, because he believes that this particular media or this particular medium is having always a negative impact, he might influence the audience. That should not be the case. He must not value judge in the beginning, but he must let the audiences, let him know what the audiences think about that particular thing. Because the same content, if used in different ways, can actually have different kinds of consequences. So a particular person, maybe 5 people are accessing a particular kind of content, maybe watching a particular kind of TV series, but 5 people might be affected in different way.
Absolutely.
Because they might relate some of the instances happening on the TV series with something which has happened in their real life. Okay, so actually the level or the amount of commonality which you can actually derive from the real life and the virtual life, maybe you will see that if the commonality is more, then you will actually identify with the story, identify with the characters. Okay, but the other person might not identify with the characters. So that is something, how much media and to what amount people are going to get affected, it might actually vary from person to person. Basically, Lars Blumder and Gurvich, they argued that the social situations can be involved in the generation of media related needs. So social situations in which a particular individual is in, it actually makes the individual choose a particular media, makes the individual choose a particular kind of channel. So the social situation plays an important role. How? They actually put forward certain points. They said that actually social situations can produce tensions and conflicts. If you are in a particular kind of a situation, maybe you are working in the IT sector, you are in total kind of stress because there is so much of work to be done and your boss is not good, then what happens is that it continuously creates an environment of tension and conflict in your mind. So in this case, actually it might be the case that you might actually try to find relaxation, as I said, relaxation from a particular media. Now your mode of relaxation might be different. You might think I want relaxation, but for getting the relaxation I will choose music, or maybe to get the relaxation I will choose to watch a movie. That is totally your choice. Second point which they stressed was that social situations can create an awareness of the problems that demand attention. Suppose if you see that you are out with your friends and you notice that the most popular people in that circle are those people who are more socially outgoing, then what you will do is, because you will try to understand why these people are outgoing. So how can you understand that? You cannot go and directly ask these people. So what you will do, you will try to gain access to different kinds of fashion magazines, or maybe different kinds of shows, fashion related shows, to see that what actually makes this category of people more socially outgoing and more attractive. So what can I do so I can also fall into that particular category of people. Okay. So that is something which actually happens when you're in real life circumstances, but you're seeking something else from the media. Seeking a kind of guide from the media.
Sort of an inspiration, actually.
Sort of an inspiration from the media, right. The third point which they put forward, that is social situations can impoverish real life opportunities to satisfy certain needs. So what they are saying is that certain media acts as substitutes or replacements. Okay. So what these things do, actually, suppose we are not getting something in our real life. Okay. Suppose we can't wear a particular kind of cloth or outfit in our real life, but we wish to wear those. So we will watch a particular kind of show where people do wear those kinds of outfits. Maybe people are wearing some expensive designer outfits in a particular channel. Okay, so what we will do is we will actually watch that kind of show because it will help us to it will help us that then satisfy our needs that somebody else is wearing these shoes. Okay, with this kind of clothes, so we can actually put ourselves in that particular position in order to satisfy their needs. Suppose we don't have a friend, we don't have good friends whom we can talk to, but we wish to talk to somebody, but we don't have the resources to talk to. Then what actually happens is that talk shows on radio and television, this will provide an endless stream of chatter to fill up the spaces in our lives. Okay, so talk shows act as a replacement,
a substitute.
Okay, substitute. The next point is actually social situations also elicits specific kinds of values, and also social situations can provide realms of expectations of familiarity with media which must be met to sustain membership in specific social groups. Okay, in order to be a member of a particular social group, you have to watch a particular kind of show. For example, if you have not watched Game of Thrones, you will be considered to be a person who is not in. You don't know anything, so you have to watch Game of Thrones. That's what I mean. The active audience thing, this was actually revisited by different kinds of theories. Mark Levy and Windall, they have actually said that the term audience activity actually postulates a voluntaristic and selective orientation by audience towards the communication process. So different theories had different kinds of take on this particular thing, and we see that J.G. Bloomler, he actually put forward certain points which actually help in the development of the extraordinary range of meanings which have been given to the concept of activity. He put forward certain points like utility, intentionality, selectivity, and imperviousness to influence. So according to this, actually audiences choose their activity. Now researchers have also distinguished between the term activity and activeness. Researchers have said that activity actually relates to what kind of media a particular audience is going to use, and activeness actually relates to what kind of needs they are going to gratify. This particular theory has been criticized by many researchers, and they say that there is a tendency to ignore the possibility of effects led by some researchers to link gratifications and effects. So some researchers have done what? They have linked effects model and uses and gratification theory together. Like we can see that Alan Rubin, another researcher who has researched on the uses and gratifications approach, he has said that the effects researchers examine the mass communication process from the source's perspective, while uses and gratifications people begin with the audience member. So audience member is prime, and there the source is prime. But both of them actually are seeking to explain the outcomes or consequences of communication. So that is important. So we can see that different kind of scholars have questioned to the extent to which people can accurately report the reasons for the media use. It might be the case that people are so much influenced by the media that people are not being able to report the accurate reasons. They don't know why they are using a particular kind of media. That is also the case. It might happen the audiences are using the media because the media is showing them certain things, so they are using it. It might be the case that they don't know why they are using it. So that is also something which we should look into. But there are some usefulness of the theory also, because this theory has always provided a cutting-edge theoretical approach in the initial stages of each new mass communications medium. As I said, that this particular theory can still be identified today, as Thomas Ruggiero has rightly pointed out. In this computer-mediated kind of communication, we see that interactivity, demassification, and asynchronity actually plays an important part. Interactivity is an important part in the social media. The people are active users. Then we see the demassification, another important part, where actually we see people are using a particular media to select which particular kind of thing which they want to use in order to understand a particular kind of resource. So they are choosing their own resource. This is demassification. And asynchronity is basically that a particular thing, suppose emails and emails, a particular kind of site, a particular kind of information, they can be stored by the people and they can be used later on by people according to their own needs. So in order to study this in the computer mediated process, we see that everything has changed, and because everything is changing in such a swift manner, so this particular approach actually is very important, because people, specifically the audience member, have become more active because of the new media related communication technologies, the advent of mobile phones, and also because of the advent of internet as a whole, the social networking sites. And so this model is still important in order to study how audiences are using the media actively according to their own approach, according to their own intentions. And this is something which this model focuses on.